So let's make a start, Gemma, and we will deal with all the people coming in late as we're all used to. So we would like to present a new series of webinars to go even further into this direct instruction and go beyond what we did last year by explaining some of the principles of Barak Rosenshine's work as they relate to science. Some of you, I know, were there, and hopefully you're ready for part 2, which is where we kind of take the story beyond where it was before. So last time we looked at all these things like teaching in small steps, checking for understanding, building strong schema, but we didn't go into the detail of how you explain well, what makes explanations effective, how do you use all these media that we have available and not misuse them and make, in fact, learning worse. So there is a lot under the skin here that we can get into, including dispelling myths like VAK and telling you what the real science says and how to apply it. So it's going to be really practical session, I hope. So I'm Tony, and I've been working with Mastery Science for about 4 years, trying to create the components of a mastery curriculum where we really try to build understanding through secondary science. And then I've been working with Gemma, who'd like to introduce herself.
Yeah, hi everyone. Yeah, I've been working with Tony on Mastery Science since it started, and before that we've worked on projects together as well. And before that I was a secondary school teacher quite a long time ago now, but yeah, that's me.
Great, so let's get into the session. We'd like to start with a bit of a prompt, and just like we do in the course that we've created, we start with this activate stage to not only see what you know or don't know, but also to get you thinking about what you might want to know. So I'm going to play you a little bit of a video explanation, the kind of thing that we do and we watch every day. And I want you to see if you know what you would do to improve it. So imagine your colleague gave this PowerPoint explanation. What would you say to them so it could be improved? Okay, Gemma, do check whether this actually works and you can hear it. I will start the video playing now. So you're looking at this from the point of view of what would I say to someone to see if they could make it better. Oops, not. Bring your shared window to the front.
In this video, I'm going to run through topic 5, which is forces of the AQA GCSE specification. I hope you find it useful.
No, I can't see it, Tony. It's not sharing.
Scalar and vector quantities. Scalar quantities have magnitude or size only.
It's playing, but it's not because you haven't shared your screen.
Right, let me try again.
Numerical value. Vector quantities have magnitude and an associated direction. Examples of vector quantities include velocity, displacement.
Okay, let's try again to share my screen properly. So here we go. Let's start that again, shall we? Where was it, Gemma? Here.
QA GCSE specification. I hope you find it useful. Topic 5 starts with a distinction between scalar and vector quantities. Scalar quantities have magnitude or size only. Examples of those include speed and distance because they both only have a magnitude, which is size or a numerical value. Vector quantities have a magnitude and an associated direction. Examples of vector quantities include velocity, displacement, force, and acceleration. And all of those values, it's important to remember that they have a magnitude, but also an associated direction. And we need to work out which direction they are acting in. As seen on the previous slide, forces are vector quantities. Now, forces can be broken down into contact and non-contact forces, which we're going to look at in a bit more detail on this slide. A force is a push or pull that acts on an object due to the interaction with another object. So forces come around because of interactions between objects. So all forces between objects are either contact forces, where the objects are physically touching. So that happens with air resistance. So the object is actually hitting the air particles that provide the air resistance. Or friction, that occurs when two surfaces slide past one another. or the normal contact force, which happens when you rest something on a table or on any other surface, or tension, which is where the force in the rope.
There you go. I think that's enough to get the idea. So what we'd like you to do is to put in the chat some, well, I should say constructive suggestions of how to make that explanation, which is multimedia, better. Let's see what you can come up with. So some of the ideas that are coming out. It's revision, learning, absolutely, yes. And that's for sure. It's not the first time they will have seen these things. Other ideas, categorizing could be done by the students. It's not engaging, it lacks pictures. There's no context, no diagrams, examples, lots of heavy text, no link to everyday life. Turn the paragraphs into filling in the words, use pictures, student-centered friendly language, all kinds of extra things. Talking too fast, right? Too much information. Could have annotated diagrams. Too much, too quick. Right, so you've picked up a lot of things here. And these are all good suggestions, right? But what it's also told me is that you still have things that would be useful for you to learn, because some of these multimedia principles, which weren't used in that teacher's video, are things that haven't been mentioned yet. So I think we have a good reason for you to be here, which is we're going to teach you some principles that you can use to improve other people's or your own explanations, or select ones that are really effective because they follow the research. Let's get back to my presentation. Great. So I will share. Let me see. Yeah. So this is what we're going to cover. We're going to look at what are the principles for choosing really good explanations, whether they're PowerPoint, spreads in a book, video, animation. The same kind of rules apply. And it's going to be really practical. So you'll see what do's and don'ts to do to make words and pictures or multimedia more effective. And because you want to understand the rationale, I'm sure we will introduce the main areas of research which apply to this: dual coding, cognitive load theory, and this new one, multimedia learning. So that's the agenda. And I do need to give a bit of a warning, because although this is research, right? Research comes with, should come with a big warning sign like this, because however tempting it sounds just to put the findings into action, as you've probably realized by now, the research never tells you exactly what to do, and it's never as clear cut as you would like. It's not simple, it's not a silver bullet. You have to know all the nuances, that, you know, when does it work? Where does it work? How does it work? With which students in which situations? The devil is in the details. And if you don't know the details, the chances are you're likely to misapply or overgeneralize the research, or simplify it so that in fact it's not really got much value. So we do need to get into these details, and we will. And the second thing I must say is that this is a cognitive theory from cognitive psychologists who love to unpick how the brain works and thinks. But they don't know so much about the emotional side, the affect, motivation, interest, engagement. All these things are a bit fuzzy and not so well defined or researched. So there aren't such clear findings, but they certainly are equally important. It's just that you're not going to hear very much about them today. So please don't think that just because words and pictures can be combined and make some effective learning, that means we should be spending all day long giving people PowerPoint presentations, because we know they can be turning students off just as much as they can be making light bulbs go on. And the third point I want to say is that because some of it sounds a bit obvious, obviously pictures and words would be better together than apart, one can think then, well, I already know this, and one can just try and assimilate this into what you already know, and it's just another idea. So that would be dangerous, because in fact, it's much more than that, and it's more complicated than that. And you do have to change some of your beliefs, as Gemma and I had to do when we wrote the book based on this theory. It certainly isn't common sense in many ways. All right, so let's now debunk this title of VAK, right? I know it's like 10 years since this was originally debunked, but I think there's still a lot of people who go around talking about it, especially in teacher training. And so the idea is still prevalent. You know, you can throw research at people all you like, but they still carry on believing things that aren't true. And why it's so pervasive is probably because it's so compelling and it relates to things that are true. So we know learners are different, right? And some people do like to read. You know, we have preferences. Some people like to watch, some people like to listen. There are definitely preferences. And this approach got a big boost in the 1980s and 90s from Howard Gardner's theory of multiple intelligences, which was all the rage, in case for those of you who are a bit too young to remember. They even had schools that claimed to be multiple intelligence schools, right? But again, that theory fell out of favor and doesn't have much actual experimental evidence to support it. And it turned out that when the psychologists got their teeth into the VAK, and they actually made it into a scientific hypothesis, which is if you present things in the style that apparently students prefer, then they learn better than if it was in another style. And it turned out all the experiments pretty much said, no, they don't, right? And so it doesn't really hold up. But what's obviously more important is to communicate using a mode that actually helps that content to be understood, right? So some things are probably necessary to be visual, and some things are probably easy to be in you know, verbal form or text form, and some things can be understood perhaps better by listening. After all, we do have radios. So looking at the content and what it is that has to be understood is a much more reliable way to decide how to use multimedia. But what actually is multimedia? Well, let's get into this idea and the theory. So all we mean, and it sounds fancy, is putting words and pictures together. It's an odd choice of a title for the theory, but it's because the world has gone all you know, online, and multimedia is another word for describing the kind of form of e-learning, which is mostly about combining videos, animations, pictures, and text in endless screens. And so to make that work better, Richard Mayer, who's an eminent psychologist, has been studying this and writing about it for 20 odd years, developing a theory of what makes multimedia effective. And the learning is the important stuff. In other words, putting together these different modes into some kind of coherent mental representation in your long-term memory. And that's multimedia learning. And his theory is a theory of how that works. What does it build on? Quite a few things that you're probably familiar with. Dual coding is very much all the rage at the moment, but it's hardly new. It's been probably invented when we lived in caves, because we've always realized that we can present in two different modes, using pictures and words or printed symbols later when we discovered writing. And so these two separate channels, which go into two different you know, senses, are pretty much independent, and we process them in parallel. So you've got, in other words, two kinds of representation, and that would obviously suggest that you can learn more if you make use of both of them together, and that's what our brains are programmed to do, to integrate them together. And we often overuse one, which is the auditory one, when we're teaching, and underuse the other one, the visual processing, which is very powerful. We are visual creatures. So let's see how we can make use of them. It's not enough just to say, we've got two, and all you have to do is put words and pictures together and you're laughing. There's much more under the skin. So that's dual coding. And that was the work of Alan Pivio. And then we move forward a bit into the 80s and 90s, and John Sweller and his cognitive load theory. Quite complicated in the way it's been presented as these three kinds of loads with different odd names: intrinsic, extraneous, and germane. But it's typical of psychologists who want to make their work seem very complicated to lay people. But basically, it means what I've put in the script. You know, intrinsic load means the space in your working memory that's taken up by all that information and all the ways it connects together, the complexity of it. And what the theory says, because it is a practical theory for learning, is that you've got this complex information and your job is to simplify it. Otherwise, it will take up too much space and working memory. Students will be overloaded and they won't learn anything. The second kind of load is the stuff you don't want. It's extraneous, it's not essential, and it distracts your limited working memory and your attention from the important stuff. So your job is to reduce or eliminate as much as you can. But the third kind, which came on stream rather later in his theory, because he couldn't quite make it work with just two, was this thing called germane, which I guess means the way you process what you do with this information so that it can be transferred into your long-term storage. And you want to maximize that, surprisingly. So you're minimizing other things, but this is what you maximize because this is the work that you're doing to make sure something actually shifts into your long-term memory. So that theory is great, but it's pretty theoretical. It doesn't tell you very much about what to do and how much to reduce and what's essential and what's not. So we need a bit more help, really. And excuse me about that. And so Richard Mayer comes along and says, okay, so the basic idea is this: words, right? They're not enough. You can't build a good mental picture of a situation with just words. And we know that we create images in our mind if we're trying to understand a system or a concept in science. We do picture things internally. So it makes sense that pictures that come in your sensory input are going to help that happen. And so the experiments are very clear. They show that when done well, students learn more from pictures and words together. And this can be explained in terms of having two different pathways, two different ways to represent the information. If one isn't very well stored, then you've got the other one. So they kind of compensate. And so this is the basic idea. But as we said, the devil's the details, because it doesn't happen automatically just by putting the two sources together. And what he's very clear about is that we have to think about the learning in a particular way. And if we assume that it's a simple matter that information comes in, goes through your working memory, goes into long-term storage, we're missing half the point, right? Because actually, if you put information in and you don't do very much with it while it's in your working memory, then not very much gets shifted into long-term memory. And all you do is learn superficial things, right? Richard Mayer is talking about meaningful, deep learning, and he's come up with a better model, which is more representative of the way cognitive psychologists think your memory works. It's a little bit more complicated, but it's not that complicated. And I would urge you to try and kind of replace any model you have with something more like this, and particularly the stages. So you've got different information coming through your senses, and your first job is attention, right? You can't pay attention to the whole environment around you. You have a narrow channel. So you have to select what's most important. And you know that humans are primed to do that. We select things that have emotional significance. They're very relevant. You know, they're about life, death, sex, food. threats, and we know how to select those things, but we then process them in two different channels. You've got your images coming through your eyes, and they seem to be going through a different pathway to the sounds coming through your ears. And with each of them, you kind of organize all that information coming through that sense, and you make a separate model, a visual model, and well, that's a mistake there, actually. We should say a verbal model. So you have to replace that in our diagram with a verbal mental model. We've got the two together. And then you've got those two, and you integrate them into one model. And at the same time, that has to kind of fix onto connections in your prior knowledge so that you can link it to your long-term memory and actually remember, connected to what you already know. So the main stages in his model are that you have to select what to pay attention to from the incoming information. You then have to organize it into a coherent model of what's on the page or in the animation. And then you have to link it to what's in your long-term memory. And then it goes in the right place, connects to things you know, and that's meaningful learning, or what he calls knowledge construction. All right, so, So that's the theory. What does it look like in practice? This is where it gets interesting, because May has spent 20 years finding principles, rules, kind of rules of thumb, if you like, but with theory behind them about what to do in different situations with different media, so that you can be sure you're getting the best out of those two channels and you're not overworking your memory. And that's what Gemma's going to help me cover. So there are three parts to this. We're going to cover the first two today, right? The how to reduce the cognitive load, manage essential processing, and the generative learning is all about the activities that you get students to do with the information. That's a separate webinar because it's a different topic, really. So in the first section, which Gemma will introduce, we're looking at, remember, how to get rid of the non-essential, the extraneous load that will actually allow you to use your limited working memory on what is essential. And there are three principles there that we're going to focus on, which are particularly relevant to science and the kind of explanations you get to use every day. And then we move on to the essential processing. In other words, how to make sure that students actually do get that processing going with what they see on the page, and two principles there, and how to simplify things into a form that they can digest. So that is the agenda of what follows. And I will pause because you might want to ask some questions about the theory or clarify something, and before we move on to the practical. Do we have some questions, Gemma?
No.
Have I broken my promise of trying not to overload your own working memory by introducing too much? Or did that all make sense because you kind of heard a lot of it before? Okay, we're fine. Makes sense. Great. Well, I'm doing the classic trick of finding one person who says it makes sense and assuming everyone does. So I'm going to move on and pass the floor to Gemma. Would you like to share your screen then, Gemma?
I can't.
You can't.
I'm a participant.
You can't share your screen. Okay, let me.
You just have to carry on sharing yours.
I've changed it now, so you can. Try again.
Yeah. Can you see that, Tony? Yeah, okay, great. So yeah, I'm going to go through looking at these different principles and actually looking at examples of where you may see them being done well or not so well in the kind of resources you might be using in the classroom. So if you first look at the principles on how to reduce the cognitive load, So the first one we're going to look at is coherence. So basically what this is students learn better when you cut out everything that's not essential. So words, pictures and sounds. So we want to be including images that promote understanding only. So not pretty pictures that don't really help explain the concept you're trying to explain. And you'll probably see that a lot in textbooks. I know that I'm guilty of it when I make PowerPoints. I like to put in pretty pictures, but actually they are taking students away from the actual understanding you're trying to get across. And also really important to remove all non-essential words. So keep the text very concise, avoid repeating the same information. So let's have a look at an example here. So this is a textbook. So I want you just to have a look and have a think about if you think that it's going against this principle or going with this principle. So have non-essential words, pictures, sounds being included from this spread. Let's have a little look at it. Okay. So I don't think it's great at this principle. So we've got images here, but not once have we got an image showing an actual food chain. And the spread is about food chains. So we've got some feeding relationship information here. You know, we've got a cheetah catching an antelope, but we haven't got the antelope eating the grass. And the same with these pictures down here. And there is a lot of text on this spread. So this is aimed at Year 7 students. And I think, you know, quite a few Year 7 students might have difficulty accessing the information here. There's a lot that's been repeated. We've got about producers, primary consumers, secondary consumers, and then we've got what they mean up here. It's a lot of information that's repeating and it's not needed. So instead of all of that information, we could have just cut some of it out and had a well-designed diagram such as this. So we've got a food chain here. We've got each of the trophic levels shown. We've got what all those words mean, and we've got examples all in one diagram, which could replace a lot of that text, and that's much more accessible to students. So I'm going to show you now some spreads from our textbook, Understanding Science, and just to show you how we use this principle in a spread on food chains. So we picked our images carefully to aid understanding. So here's an example. We're actually showing the food chain. We're using images and words to show the food chain. We've minimized the text, so every single word on there is chosen for a reason, and we spent a long time designing the text so it actually was useful text. Nothing superfluous there. And we use diagrams instead of text where possible. So we've got lots of food chains here, and we've used them to show different things. So what happens when one organism changes, different levels of in a food chain. So we've tried to use diagrams wherever we possibly can to aid understanding. Okay, the next principle then is called signalling. So this is when we're saying students learn better when we're highlighting the main points, and we're also showing how the material is organised. So examples of things you could do include highlighting key terms, using headings well to break down, to organise the material into chunks, use graphic organisers as well, and think about your use of colour as well. So using the same colour to link similar items. So I'm going to show you 3 different examples here. And in a minute, I'm going to ask you which one you think followed this principle the best. So we're thinking about, are there cues to highlight the organisation of the information? So here's A. So have a look at A and see what you think using that principle. Okay, and there's B. And C is a video, so hopefully be able to see it.
Can't hear anything, Gemma.
Can you see it?
Yeah, seeing it, but not hearing it. So it's not multimedia.
Oh.
It's very, very quiet in the background.
Okay, I've got the volume up full. I could try playing it again. Let me just see if I can. My volume all the way up to the top. I'll try again then.
Now, all forces can be divided.
No, it's garbled. I think we'll have to exclude
Okay.
that one.
All right, I don't know what's going on there then. I need to get back to my PowerPoint. Okay. Well, you can see this is an image of what the screen actually ends up looking like. I'm sorry if you couldn't hear it, but just look at it as an image then, maybe not the video, if you didn't hear that. Okay, so which do you think did that better? Oh. A, B or C? Which one was better at signalling? So pointing out the highlights of the information, the key points, and also good organisation of the key points. I can't see the chat, Tony, so you can have a
Everybody's
look.
going for C.
Okay, let's have a look then. Okay, so A, I actually thought A was pretty good at this. Each of those 3 diagrams there is showing a different force, so it's organising the information. We've got names of the different forces in different colours, and that's shown also on the diagram as well and in the text, so we are signalling there. And yeah, different colour for each force. So air resistance is pink, so I can see that in the text and I can see that on the diagram as well. So I thought that one was pretty good. That one, not so good. So there's no organisation really. We've got random boxes, different types of information, no heading on each box. I don't really understand what each one's about. So I've got a yellow box. I've marked one of the boxes yellow. That's just telling me how forces are measured. And then I've got the 2 ones in red are telling me about balanced forces. And then the other one's telling me about types of forces. So there's no organisation there. I don't know which one I'm supposed to read first or order to read the information. They have got words in bold, so I'm expecting those to be key words, but some of them are names of forces, some aren't. So I've got direction in bold, I've got arrows in bold. You know, what are those bold words actually trying to show me? Why are they important? Not great, that one at signalling, a bit confusing. Yeah, so C, I thought was really good. The information is shown in small chunks, and that's something you can easily do with a video or a PowerPoint. And the information is organised to show the connection. So we've got the forces split up into contact and non-contact, and we've got then the different types of each type of force. Each type of force is in a different colour. So we've got the purple contact and the green non-contact. So we're separating them in that way. And if you did hear the video, he actually really emphasised the word contact every time he says it to reinforce that. So that was a good one.
Can I inject there, Gemma, a second? If you go back to the slide, remember the model that I introduced about Richard Mayer's processing, active construction of knowledge. So the information passes through your working memory, but you have to actually organize it yourself. After you've processed the visual information, you have to organize it into a mental model. And so essentially this principle is saying, how do you help that process that students have to do? How do you make it easier? By putting the material in an organized form, right? If it's already organized, they don't have to do much work. But if you don't organize it, they have to do a lot of work. They might overload their capacity and not learn much. So it's kind of supporting the mental processes you want to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So how do we use this then? What do we do in the textbook? So we use very clear headings, and that's signaling what is coming next. So we've got a question at the start. So they're going to learn that throughout the spread. And then each of the ideas, we've got a main idea, which is contact forces. And then we've got each of that split down into the different names for different forces. We've got our key terms in bold, and we've got a list at the top there, so they know they're coming up and they can spot them in the text, so signaling that those are important words. All the forces we're shown with a red arrow, so we're signaling the forces each time they come up. So here's the next principle then. So we're saying that students learn better when we put words, text very close to the diagram that they're trying to explain, the picture on the page. So picture and text close together. So again, we're going to have a look at some different examples. So do you think in each of those, it's using this principle well, are the related words and pictures presented very close to each other? So have a look at each of these. This is A. Oh, where's B? Okay, that's C. Okay, we've got B. This is a PowerPoint presentation, so we'll just go through the slides very quickly. Cell parts. Okay, that's the final slide. So what do we think then? A, C, or B?
Should we have a quick recap?
Oh, yeah. Okay, let's have a look at each of them then. So A did not do it very well. So we've got the description of each of these cell parts, but the diagram is at the bottom with the actual where the cell parts are in the cell. So a student's eye is going to go, okay, nucleus. Let's have a look down at this diagram. There's the nucleus. Okay, I need to go back up to have a look and carry on reading about the nucleus. So they are having to go backwards and forwards between text and diagram constantly. Oh, okay, so that's that one. C, I thought actually did quite well. So we've got the diagrams with the cell parts first, and then we've got the uses below, but it's quite close. It's in the same order as well, which helps. So that one was okay. B was not very good at all because we had the descriptions of each cell first on each slide and then the diagram at the end. So as this was a PowerPoint as well, the students are going to have to hold that information about each cell part until you get to the end slide, which actually shows where it is in the cell. So that was not great. So what did we do? So here's our spread on cell parts. So the first diagram here, we have the cell with the parts, and we've also got a very short description of what it does as well. So we've not only linked the part, the name, we've got a description. So we can see that there. And then we go on to having a look at each part, and we've elaborated a bit more because they need to know a bit more information about what each part does, but we've repeated the diagram and we've shown the part as well. So it's still next to the part. So their eye hasn't got to go very far when they're linking the name, the function, and where it is in the cell. So that's that bit. So each of the cell parts are done like that. Okay, so that's where their eye has to go, not very far. Okay, have we got any questions on that bit, Tony? Is there anything you want to elaborate on any of that? No?
I don't see any questions. No, so let's pause for a second in case anyone wants to think about it. But do you want to just sort of give a moment for breath, because we've given you 3 principles there for removing things that ought not to be there, or difficulties like having to search around the page that you need to reduce as much as possible. Do we think that we can apply these? Can you see ways to improve some of the things that you use or select or write yourself using these principles? Do you think they're valuable? So if you have any comments about what you do, that could be useful to share in the chat with other people. And then I'll let you continue, Gemma.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, so we're continuing. We've got another 2 to look at. So this is how to manage essential processing, how we're going to help them actually begin to build up those mental models. So the first one we're going to look at then is pre-training. So when you introduce some complex material, it's a good idea to introduce key terms or simple concepts that are going to help them build a model of the new material before you do that. And we've done this in Complete Mastery. One of the ways you can do it is to activate prior knowledge by doing like an activate task first of all. So let's have a look at a couple of examples. So this one is from a textbook. It's the only spread actually which is on temperature and energy in this book. So do you think if a student came to this spread, they'd be able to figure out the difference between temperature and energy, or what those terms mean using this spread? So very quick, just have a look what you think. Maybe focus on this bit here on temperature.
Yes, we have a nice comment. Ugh, don't read it.
A lot of information there, and it's a very complicated subject. Energy in general. Okay, let's have a look. So the bit I pointed out here is really to understand temperature, you need to understand the difference, the particle energy. So here they've got the temperature of the water can tell us how much energy is in the water molecules, and that's the only thing that they are actually going into talking about temperature there. Would a student actually really understand what that sentence meant? Probably not. So you need a bit of pre-training before you come onto a spread like that. So this is what we did in Understanding Science. So before we even try and explain the difference between temperature and energy, we need to look at what temperature means in terms of particle energy. They've done about particles before they come onto this, so they know that particles are moving around. So we're just saying, well, it's just a difference in how much they move around. So this is activating prior knowledge, and this is explaining a very important fact that they need to know before they can understand anything more about this information. So now they understand that, we can actually use that then to understand what happens when an object heats up, or the difference between energy and temperature. So we are pre-training them to understand more complex ideas, basically. And the next principle then is segmenting. So you learn better if information is presented in small chunks rather than all together. So you would want to chunk up the content and present them sequentially, if possible. Now, this is really easy to do with an interactive. So something like this, the information is broken into small chunks and they're displayed separately, and they're at the student's pace as well. So they can just click on the ice, find out about particles in ice. Okay, I've got that, I can move on, click on the next one, and the information is chunked up. So you're never going to get a lot of information at the same time. But how can you use that principle in text-based resources? That's when it's quite difficult to do. So if you have a look at what a textbook has done, what they've done well is they put in the information about each spread, each state separately. So we've got solid, liquid and gas, although I would argue you'd want the solid together all on one page. Obviously it's quite difficult to do, but it's not sequential. So on other spreads, they go into detail about diffusion and gas pressure, whereas you'd want that all together rather than on separate spreads. So in understanding science, we did that. We did gases on one spread and liquids on another and solids on another. So we've got all of that information on the same spread. So we're not going backwards and forwards through the book trying to find the information. And then within each spread, we presented it sequentially. So each spread's got the same layout. So we have the model first of what the particles look like in the solid, liquid and gas. Then we've got why that gives that material its properties. And then we've got an application. So in this point, we're looking at expansion. So can you use the model now to explain something new? So I'm going to give you a bit of something to do now. So here is a spread about unicellular organisms. So I want you to have just a quick think about all the principles we looked at. Which of those do you think have followed and which not? Or can you just spot anything that you think is good and things that you think are not so great about how the information is presented on this spread? Okay, I think we'll have a look then. So, signalling. So we've got key words, key terms are highlighted. And we've got headings, clear headings. We've got one type of unicellular organism, what do they eat, how do they reproduce, another type, what do they eat, how do they reproduce. So I think that the text is organised really well there. One thing could be better, the keywords could be put at the top so students are given a bit of pre-training just to say what's coming up, what the keywords are, but nothing major. That's pretty good, that one. Coherence, so yes, only essential diagrams. They've got a diagram of each of the organisms, plus they've got one to show how amoebas reproduce. So only essential diagrams used there. We've got a bit of repetition of information. So at the bottom here, we've got the parts of the amoeba. Well, we don't need that if we've got it in the diagram up there. So that's just filling space, I think. We've got a foul fact here, which some textbooks love to put in. I think, oh, it's really interesting. It is distracting. According to these principles, we don't need it. It's just extra information we don't need. And the introduction up here, it doesn't really add anything. The first organisms that exist on Earth are made of a single cell. I mean, that's not really relevant to understanding about their structure and how they live. So you could argue we don't need that either. Those are the bits we could lose. So, I mean, we've got the diagrams, we've got the parts, but we've got the function of each part a little bit away from the diagram. So they could be closer. We could put just a brief explanation under each part about what it does, each of these new parts. That could be better. The pre-training, we have got the meaning of what a unicellular organism is at the start to prepare them, for they're going to be seeing 2 different unicellular organisms. That's good. And the segmentum, we've got 2 different sections, 1 for each organism. And what is nice, whether students use them or not, I don't know, but there is some attempt here, a question to get students to pause and reflect on what they've learned before moving on to the next part. So you would hope they use them. I don't know how often they do, but it's an attempt to help them process those ideas. Okay, there's the different sections. Okay. Do you want to do the next bit, Tony?
Yes. Actually, you had the right slide up there. I just have to find it a second.
Or do you want me to put it up again?
You could do, yeah.
Yeah.
So we've come to the end of all the content here, and we hope that you've learned some of the principles. With that exercise, you can see what's good and what's not so good. If you've developed your sensibilities at critiquing these different forms of multimedia, then we've had some positive impact, and you'll be able to choose better and know whether what you've done is right or wrong, to help your own creations. Now, finally, just to give you some kind of extra reward for being here, if you go to the next slide, Gemma, we are doing a project at the moment for the European Commission. Yes, we still get money from them, and they funded the production of a new activity which fits very well with the conference on climate change called Carbon Neutral, where the students can actually help a business to become, zero carbon emitters and apply all their knowledge from GCSE at the same time. And because we need the data for the European Commission on background information about what students know and do in their lives relating to science, we're going to give you a reward if you're prepared to get your students to complete this survey. It's very short, it's ethically approved, it's totally anonymous. And if you do get your students to do it, then you can get £3 of credit towards a textbook. So we're going to give away lots of textbooks to people who'd like to do the survey for us, to give us the information that the European Commission require. So if you'd like to try that in the next, well, it's got to be in the next 3 weeks, then take down the web address and have a go. And there you go. So there's a reward if you'd like to have an input in our project. And we'll send you the details and the PowerPoint tomorrow. Would you like to go to the last slide? In case you would like to see all the things we do and you haven't visited the website, those are some of the things that go with our mastery curriculum. And we will finish there. Thank you very much for attending. A quick advert for next week. Next week, we're going to move to the 3rd element of Richard Mayer's theory, which is about how to make sure students process the information you give them, and they're not just passively trying to absorb it. There are 8 different research-backed activities that you can do. So it's not just asking questions, it's not just filling in gaps. There are 8 specific things that really help with absorbing, processing, deep, meaningful learning. So we'll cover those next week. And if you'd like to stay and ask each other questions or us, please do. We'll make this webinar available to everyone online. Thank you very, very much for your attention and joining us. I hope that's been useful. So I'll see you again.